City of Stevens Point Plan Commission meeting, recorded March 4, 2019.
At 6 o'clock, we will call the regular City Plan Commission meeting to order. Can we get a roll call, please?
Weezer.
Here.
Kneebone.
Here.
Arnson.
Here.
Cooper.
Here.
Haynes.
Here.
Hoppy.
Here.
Rice.
Here.
Everyone is present. So we'll move on to our action items. Item number 2 is on page 2 of your packet, and that is the report of the February 4th meeting. Commissioners, thoughts? Yes, sir.
I'm good with them, but I would like to acknowledge the letter from Jim Guzman that we didn't get a chance to read last time.
Okay. Yep.
And I think he makes some good points in terms of this big building being plopped down next to his. I don't know that there's anything to do about it, and I don't have any specific recommendations, but I would like to at least acknowledge it.
And that is completely appropriate. As I mentioned at the February 4th meeting, it was rather lengthy, but we did include that in the record. It's available on the website for anyone to see in the record. And we are acknowledging it here in item number 2. Other than that, corrections, additions, Commissioner Cooper?
Move approval.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Seconded by Commissioner Arnson. Any discussion there? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that is approved. Item number 3 is a request from Rettler Corporation representing Holy Spirit Parish for a reduced setback to construct an addition at the church at 838 Fremont Street. Page 16 of your packet, Commissioners and Director.
So the next 2 items, 3 and 4, kind of go together. It's actually 3 separate requests. However, one request is handled internally by staff. The first request is to reduce the setback of the church addition that they're looking to put on. It's about a 10,000 square foot addition, multi-purpose center that they're looking to put on the north side of the church, and then with a drive-up canopy area. Under our zoning code, it does allow for the Plan Commission and Council to reduce the setbacks for churches, schools, or similar type buildings within these residential neighborhoods to reduce that setback from the current 25-foot street yard setback to a 10-foot setback to be consistent with, typically they've been built up to the closer to the street in the past and be consistent with that. So that's one of the requests before you. The second one is an alternative parking plan to take a look at kind of the current zoning requirements relating to parking and how they impact this use and how the use will actually function on site and whether or not they need that many parking stalls as outlined in the zoning code. The zoning code allows for an exception to take place to an alternative parking plan, again approved by the Plan Commission and Council to reduce those numbers of stalls or to reduce some of the geometrical dimensions within the parking area. And then finally, the third request is a constrained sites parking request, and that's handled internally by staff. And really what that is that when the parking lot is reconstructed and it cannot meet certain zoning requirements, for example, setbacks or landscaping, where those requirements would push that parking below the needed parking requirements for that use, the zoning administrator can grant a constrained sites to allow for the reconstruction of a parking lot. So those are the 3 things that we are looking at. One, the 10-foot setback is the first one off of the north side of the building. They will maintain that 25-foot off of Fremont Street. We do feel it's appropriate. We feel that the architectural appeal and the adjacencies to the other buildings within the vicinity, that it would not cause any issues with them. In terms of the reduction or the alternative parking plan, just one note in there, under the conditions we would, under number 1 it says 121, we would, that would be 114 actually. They modified the parking lot on the southeast side of the site to meet the current setbacks. Within this project, they are looking to remove the rectory and construct an additional parking lot on the southeast side of the site. That is allowed by right, so it's not something we would be reviewing here tonight. They can do that by right under the current zoning. But this is quickly just a vicinity map of the property that we're looking at. This is the proposed site layout. The church is here, the new addition again to the north. The proposed new parking lot to the southeast of the site. The school building will remain, and then the existing parking lot to be reconstructed. Again, a nice drive-up canopy that they'd be looking at to going at as well. just another site plan that they had put together. And a few renderings, again, kind of how they match the architectural appeals with the windows, with the entryways, with the addition that was put on St. Stan's on that church in the past. So in terms of the recommendations for that, with the 10-foot setback, staff would recommend approving the 10-foot setback under item number 3. Under item number 4, we'd also recommend approving the alternative site parking plan. Given the use of this site and it being a church, most of their function takes place on either Saturday evenings, Sundays, when the adjacent users, whether that be the hospital or the university, are typically not in session. Streets are typically fairly vacant during that time, and we don't want to see parking lots constructed just for 1 or 2 days a week. So we feel it's appropriate given what is around them and kind of the number of stalls that they have on site, as well as what they have on street parking, so we'd recommend approval of that as well.
And just a note again for the commissioners, condition number 1 will not be 121, it will be 114 per staff recommendations. Any questions before we go to the public? Okay, any comments from the audience?
Kathy Dugan, Alder for District 8. This isn't an argument, but it's comments on the Catholic Church campuses, and this is one of them. I have no difficulty with the setback reduction, the building design, etc. But I did just want to make a few words, if that's okay. St. Stan's, or Holy Spirit, is one of 4 historic Roman Catholic campuses or complexes in Point. The others are St. Peter's, St. Stephen's, and St. Joseph's. Over many years, each parish has had 4 significant buildings on its campus: a church, rectory, convent, and school. St. Peter's and St. Joseph's appear to retain their full campus presence, and they have added gathering halls. St. Stephen's retains 3 of its buildings. However, the convent was razed a few years ago, and the lot where it stood is now green space. St. Stan's, Holy Spirit, also lost its convent to demolition several years ago, and now its rectory is proposed to be razed and replaced by a parking lot. And I understand that's not, in your purview. But the parking options on site, even after the addition is built, and the parking availability in the immediate area are adequate for the church's needs, and that the director just mentioned too. Naturally, institutions need to make changes over time. At this time, St. Stan, Holy Spirit, requires an addition to serve its community. St. Peter's built one too, and so did St. Joseph. I don't think St. Stephen's has. The design of the addition at St. Peter's blends in well with the church. I took another look at that today. That is one of the most historic churches we have in Stevens Point. It's just a monumental Gothic revival church. The additions, masonry, the gables, the arched windows really complement this tall Gothic revival church. St. Joseph's addition is more modern, but the height and masonry echo the church building, so it kind of fits in. I would ask that, and I'm not asking you really, but I would ask in general that the St. Stan's addition add more height. It does seem a little peculiar to have a 1-story next to a pretty good-sized church. Perhaps with an additional gable and include arched windows on all sides of the building. I'm not sure that it has that. I'm not sure you can speak to that. But finally, in summary, all 4 of our city's Catholic campuses are important to our community's character, history, and culture. I don't want to see them visually altered so much that we can't identify their historic contribution to our city. And I say this as a former Catholic, but also our Lutheran we have a Lutheran campus or 2 that's similar. The church, the rectory, the schools. I think they're very important and significant to our community.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay. Seeing no one else wishing to speak, bring it back to the commissioners. Commissioners, just on item number 3 now, we have a request for the reduced setback for the construction of the addition, and you have the staff recommendation of approval.
I make a motion to approve the staff recommendation for the
Addition.
10-foot setback.
Thank you very much. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Commissioner Hoppy. Discussion there? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that is approved. Item number 4 is, as the director stated, a request from Rettler Corporation representing Holy Spirit for an alternative parking plan at 838 Fremont Street. And as indicated by the director, their recommendation is that a minimum of 114 stalls shall be provided on site. The other conditions are on page 17 of your packet, Commissioners. Any comments on this one for the audience? Mary, do you have your hand up, or are you just scratching? Okay, just checking. Okay, Commissioners, Commissioner Haynes?
I had a couple of questions. One, does this mean that, because in most reconstructions, they have to then have landscape standards attached to it? So are we just
So,
lifting that?
so with this one, and that's where I'd mentioned the third element that comes into play here is that constrained site exemption. So internally, as, from the zoning administrator standpoint, we can waive those requirements if, for example, under this instance, the number of required stalls under our zoning code, which would be like nearly 250, if we would add landscaping, let's say they wanted to reconstruct this, and now we require them to have a 5-foot landscape separation between the right-of-way and the new parking lot, that would reduce it even further than what they are now. That can be waived, in which we would do internally.
So as we discuss the new zoning code, we haven't talked about it for a while, but what would be the difference under that code?
I think we'd still have a very similar constrained site situation. We often see that where parking lots were constructed, stormwater features were constructed, where now if you're under a new zoning code that would have a significant amount more from a setback standpoint to the parking lot, which would put those stalls under the needed ones, I think we'd have a very similar approach with that. In terms of the stall count, from the standpoint of churches, they'd be very similar to what we have now. I think in general, though, we probably need to have a conversation about minimum parking requirements, period, and whether or not we want to continue with those, or we want to maybe reduce those significantly. I think we're seeing that a lot throughout the entire country, where where they're more focused now on maximum parking requirements versus the minimum stalls. Typically, a business or a facility will know what they need in terms of parking requirements. For example, if you're a healthcare institution or a doctor's office, you're appointment-based, so it may not necessarily be 1 per 300. You know how many appointments that you can take and where you're constructing the number of stalls. So I think it's a larger conversation that we'll have. The template that we're using, though, very similar in terms of the number.
Yeah, because, well, and I think you said it, right? It's a pretty large parking lot for once a week use. So my other question is, how about shared parking? We have the hospital on one side and the university in a couple different spots where there's lots of parking. And we have roads as well to park on, so.
And that's
Is
where,
there
yeah, and that's where
possibility of shared parking?
they do some of that. So, you know, on the weekends when you have church services, a lot of parishioners will park in those other lots, mainly the hospital lot as well as the street, with this lot being full.
So there would just be more people parking around.
Correct.
if
Because
there
this
was
will
land.
kind of encroach into that area a little bit with the canopy addition, but they still allow parishioners are still parking in other lots surrounding this site, whether that be the street or whether that be the hospital lot. They do also have agreements with the university for lots T and Z.
Several other places already do that. I know the Pisarski Funeral Home has an agreement with St. Pete's
Yep.
to allow parking there on church days and so on. Commissioner, were you done? We'll go with
Nope, those
Commissioner.
were my similar questions, just
Okay.
about,
Okay.
I don't know if they're even,
Any other questions? Okay. Alder Nabel?
Hi, Cindy Nabel, District 3, 1100 Phillips Street. St. Stan's is in my district, and proud to say that it is. I love that church, and I'm glad to see how they have connected with university and brought their area, their changes that they've made there to include students. My only question is, I understand the parking and the comments made about not having any, requirements for the greenery or any type of shrubbery around the area is not so much for the parking lot, but other areas that will be a new building on there. Will they be required to do some kind of landscaping to soften it, because we have so much hard space throughout that whole area? It really, one thing that was always nice, at least with the rectory, there was some trees and there were some things that, at least more green area. We're losing a lot of green space. I just hope that we will require something to be in there to maybe add a little bit more of that greenery to the area too.
So the short answer to your question is yes, but it looks like the director's ready to speak on some of that already.
Yeah, so with the parking lot, you can see on the site plan here, there will not be much of a green area surrounding this. You know, not only do they use it as a parking lot, but it's used for, you know, many church functions. The school also can use it, but with the green area, they will have landscaping around the new addition, as well as, since this is a new parking lot, you can see that they have a larger setback, so that would require that larger setback, which they have provided, and within that green area, they're gonna, or within that setback area, they will have landscaping within that.
Great, thank you. And is there any, I mean, I don't know there's a big difference in price, but permeable blacktop or whatever, is that ever been a possibility of implementing in some of these big massive areas that we have so much concrete going in, or blacktop?
So a couple of things there. That would be up to the development if they'd want to do that. It may also go within their stormwater requirements that they take a look at. But within our zoning code, we require that when the stalls go above 150% of the required number of stalls. So for example, if, you know, they went 150% above the 249, I think they'd need, then they'd be required to put that permeable pavement within that area.
And will any additional sewer be put in for those areas, because it does get pretty swampy over there?
Stormwater.
Stormwater,
Not
thank you, not sewer. Stormwater.
So they will have to meet
Gotcha.
stormwater requirements for
Okay.
the site.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Alder Dugan, you had something to add?
Yeah, Alder Dugan from District 8. Just a question of clarification about the rectory. Will it be demolished or moved? It's a really sturdy building, and that's one, and it's related. And secondly, I don't quite understand why they need a parking lot there. They have so many other spaces. Is there any reason for that?
As the director said earlier,
I know.
they would be required to have about 250.
Yeah.
We're reducing that amount because there is ample parking on the streets.
There is, yeah.
But they need parking as well for their parishioners.
Do they still need that 15-stall little one in the southeast?
They would be required, per the recommendations of staff, to have 114 spots on site.
And that requires to take out a whole building.
It's also my understanding, Alderperson, that the building would likely be raised.
Yes, that's what I thought too.
So the rectory would be removed, whether they choose to move it or raise it, that will be up to them. But as part of this project, they are looking at constructing the parking lot. Now, if the commission would so desire, if for some way they decide that they don't need those 15 stalls, if we want to drop that number down to 99 instead of 114, I don't have an issue with that. I think there's ample parking surrounding the site to accommodate the uses, and that would afford them the flexibility that if they want to keep that entire area green, they want to do something else with it, they could do that. So if you wanted to change that 114 down to 99, or to propose parking as planned in the reconstructed lot, I'd be fine with that.
Okay, thank you.
I'm glad to hear there's that option. Yeah, I hate to see a good building go down, and the campus is going to be pretty naked by the time they take that building down too and put in even more asphalt.
Thank you. Any other comments from the audience? Yes, sir.
I was gonna ask him to make it minimum
Steve Chisel, I'm an architect with Ellis Stone, and I'm the designer on the project. So anything you want to ask, you can ask me here. And I do want to address a couple of things that were brought up. Not shown on the site plan, around the existing parking in the northwest area, there is a little bit of green space between the paving and the sidewalk right now. Not a lot, and there's a fence there, a cyclone fence. That will come down, and the green space will be retained. Now, whether there's shrubbery added or extra amenities in there, I don't know, but at least it will be green space surrounding the parking. And in the southeast corner, as you saw, the rectory, we're planning on taking down the rectory and adding parking because they can use as much parking as possible, believe it or not. Easter Sunday, I've heard there's 600 plus people there. So the parking just doesn't accommodate it, and even on a normal Sunday. So they're trying to maximize parking. You saw on the Rattler site plan that the south parking lot, because it's new, has to follow the new zoning code. So it is restricted on the quantity of stalls that are installed there. It would be wonderful to expand that paving all the way to the sidewalk edge, but obviously we have to follow the zoning code unless we're able to reduce that a little bit. But that corner, we're just trying to maximize parking as well as we can. The rectory itself, they would love to see someone take that building and move it somewhere else. And they wouldn't charge a dime. So if you are interested in a really nice, sturdy brick building, talk to the parish, because if there's an empty lot close by, maybe the city can help us find one. It would be wonderful to move that building, but the parish is not able to do that. So essentially, it will be raised unless someone comes forward to move it.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, bringing it back to the commission. Commissioners, what are your wishes?
I would make that motion with the suggestion of 99.
Okay.
Give them some flexibility that, you know, as they work through it, if they want to do that, but that's with, again, the ample parking around, but it's up to them, so.
Okay, so
I would make the
Hoppe?
motion with all the recommendations except for a change to a minimum of 99 stalls shall be provided.
Okay, so that we have a motion to approve the alternative parking plan at 838 Fremont Street with staff recommendations, and staff recommendation 1 would be a minimum of 99 stalls on site.
Yep.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Commissioner Arntzen. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in
Actually,
favor?
wait, I
Oh,
do have a question. Why is it minimum? That means
That's
we
that
could
discussion
maximize
we've
it.
So right now, under the current code, they would be required to have 240-something. When they come forward for the alternative parking plan, typically there is a justification on why they need a certain number of stalls, indicating that, you know, the parishioners and why they're getting reduced. The reason why we're reducing it below the 250 is because of the reasons stated within the staff report, mainly because there is ample parking
No,
surrounding
I
it
get
with the
I get
hospitals.
why we're doing that, but it says a minimum.
Right, so, correct me if I'm wrong,
Are
Director.
we saying
So
you
they
they
couldn't-
can only have 99?
No, it's
or are
a
we
minimum.
saying you
So
can
we're saying
have-
you cannot
Okay.
completely eliminate your parking lot and have 8 stalls on site, and then it would start likely impacting the adjacent neighbors.
It's basically a benchmark for any future development on the site, a minimum that they need to have on the property.
Does that answer your question, Commissioner? Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, we have a motion to approve with staff recommendations and including a minimum of 99 stalls on site. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
And note Commissioner Haynes. And that motion is approved. Item number 5 is a request from the Redevelopment Authority of the City of Stevens Point to purchase and sell or transfer or dispose of 5 properties, including 1909 Prairie Street, 1525 Ellis, 1700 Strongs Avenue, 1708 Elk Street, and 1100 Fourth Avenue. Page 40 of your packet, Commissioners. Director, you have the floor.
So this may or may not go anywhere, but looking at some of these properties and working with our neighborhood improvement coordinator and trying to address some of the blight within certain neighborhoods, these properties have become a challenge. They have gone to foreclosure, however, the bank has not taken them, and they do not plan to take them, even though they've been awarded the foreclosure. So these properties will likely go to tax deed. Some of them are in pretty pretty rough shape. One or two may need to be torn down and may be a candidate for our demolition program. But a couple of them may be able to be saved, and Mr. Cordes, our neighborhood improvement coordinator, has been working with CAP Services. CAP Services has some dollars available that they can spend either within the city of Stevens Point or the city of Wisconsin Rapids relating to renovating certain properties that may have gone through the foreclosure process and where they can get a warranty deed associated with that. The problem is CAP Services can't bid on these properties if they come to tax deed. So they kind of need an intermediary to do that for them and then either sell them the property or transfer the property, whatever deal would be made. Hence where the redevelopment authority may be able to step in, and that still needs to be discussed with the redevelopment authority about selling or transferring some of these properties if that opportunity presents itself, depending on what they would be bid at through the tax deed process. With the county, they must take the fair market value of the property on the first bid. If they do not receive any bids, then they can sell it for pretty much whatever they can get for those properties. But the first bidding process, they have to take the fair market value. So what this agenda item is really doing is just authorizing the RA to bid on these properties and then sell or transfer them to CAP Services or another agency to try and get them redeveloped. Within these two, even though I'd like approval for all five, there really is a couple that we'd be looking at that may be more prone to be able to be redeveloped. 1708 Elk Street, very nice property, good neighborhood. The concern with this property is that it's converted into a duplex, so to reconvert it back to a single family is going to be very expensive. They took out the inner stairway, they've got a stairway out back, so there's some conversion costs that need to be absorbed somewhere in order for that project likely to move forward. And then 1525 Ellis Street would likely be another good candidate with that. The other two properties are really challenged. And then the 1700 Strongs Avenue, it's a beautiful structure. I've been in it. I think it could make a really good use, but it's very limited on what is going to go there and the use that's going to go in there. So likely going to be these two in the bottom left, but it could be another that pops up. So that is the reason why it's before you. So it would be for the acquisition of these properties, likely through the tax deed bidding process, and then disposition of the properties to an agency for the redevelopment.
And again, the reason this body's looking at it is because statutorily, this body has to make a recommendation for the acquisition or disposition of property. Comments from the audience? Alderman Combe?
Mary McComb, Alder, District 9. I just want to say that 1708 Elk, I would love to see that rehabbed. And I know I've had a few calls from constituents about that building and its occupants. So I was happy to see that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Alder Morrow.
Sean Morrow, 2509 Falcons Cove. Would the city be able to bid on this below what the market value was? Because I see from
Not the
going
first
by
time.
these. Okay, so once that is done, then the city could offer whatever they think they might be able to get, because I don't think on too many of these that you'd actually get fair market value for, and I just wanted to make sure that the city wouldn't have to pay that.
So the process is that this would go to the county space and properties after it's taken through tax deed intercept. The law says that they have to take at least market values on the first round of bidding. If they get a bid, they can dispose of it. If they don't get a bid that's at least market value, then they go through a second round of bidding, at which point the space and properties can make a recommendation to take the bid that is in the best interest of the county. That does not have to be the highest bid. It's in the best interest of the county. And of course, since our goal is to rehab at least some of those properties, I would hope that that would be in the best interest of the county.
So the city probably would not bid on the first round?
Probably not, yes. I would say we wouldn't bid on the first round because.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right. Any other comments from the audience? Alder Dugan?
District 8, Alder Dugan, after decades of looking at some of these houses and knowing the people who own them, same people owned all of these, I am so grateful that we're going to do something about it. And it's a cautionary tale. This is not something that real estate owners should be going for. You know, lots and lots of old houses, you know, build them up. Let's rake them in, turn them into duplexes and triplexes, these little family houses. We've got way too much of that going on, and that's why I'm so grateful that the city is recognizing that, and that we have rehab programs, we have demolition programs. These kind of things should not have happened, and any of you trying to do that out there, think twice.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, commissioners, what are your wishes?
Well, I have a question first, and just for clarification. The county assumes properties based on tax deeds. The city does not do that?
Correct.
Is that, could you explain that to me? Can the city? Are
No.
there that's specific to the county?
Yes.
It's a county.
Statutorily, the county has that ability. They will then make the city whole through their tax payments. The county has to pay the city for whatever delinquent taxes there are or any other taxing entities, and then the county is responsible for recouping that loss in all likelihood.
So, and one of the reasons why, you know, this is before you, and then subsequently we'll have a conversation with the redevelopment authorities, the county doesn't need to start the tax deed process. They could just let these properties sit and not take them. That could happen. However, if there is a potential willing buyer out there, hence the redevelopment authority or CAP services, they may be more inclined to take them, to get them back into a state of repair and back on the tax roll. So that's one of the reasons why it's for you now, is, sir, we can indicate to the county that we may have interest in these 2 or 3 or 1 or whatever properties, where then they may decide to take them, where they may not decide to take all these this time around.
Perhaps similar to the bank and the foreclosure process. If they knew somebody was interested, they may foreclose?
So we had discussed that with the bank, and they would not go through that process.
All right, good. No, just curious.
Any other comments, questions, or a motion? Alder Nebo.
I would move to approve the request from the redevelopment authority to purchase and sell/transfer or dispose of the 5 properties listed on the agenda.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Seconded by Commissioner Rice. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that is approved. Item number 6 on page 60 of your packets is a request from the city of Stevens Point to accept the conveyance of property from Joan M. Zarowski at the east end of East Maria Drive, east of Green Avenue, at the parcel identified in the agenda. Director.
It's kind of an odd situation, but they keep getting a tax bill for this, these 2 small slivers of property. Sometimes property just gets left over in the remnant pieces and they get lost in the system. But these are 2 pieces of property that will likely be right away. They're just looking to transfer them to the city. City owns the property to the north. 2 separate parcels, because one's in the town of Hall, one's in the city of Stevens Point, but they would transfer them both to the city to clear up the ownership within the surrounding area.
Pretty cut and dry. Comments from the audience? Okay, commissioners, bringing it back to you. Commissioner,
Move approval of the request as presented.
thank you. Do we have a second? Let's give the second to Commissioner Haynes. Discussion? Alder Nabel?
Thank you, Commissioner. I just would like to understand how this process and why we do this process more for my own education and for others probably too, but Cindy Nabel, District 3. Why would it be advantageous for us to take a property on that we'll have to now maintain the property and stretch our public works departments further on having to maintain a property that belongs to somebody else that decided they did not want to maintain it? So I find it interesting It's not like it's in an area that we want to do a development or anything, and so why
No,
wouldn't
but we do use that area right now. If you look on the photograph, you'll still see remnants of snow. I imagine when you take that picture this year, there'll still be snow there in July.
Probably in
But we,
July.
we store our snow out there.
So the other thing, this is in the airport flight zone, so it likely will not be developed, and again, it would serve as the right-of-way where these portions of property should have transferred when the ownership transferred. The current owner, the Zorowskis, do not own any property surrounding it. All they own is these slivers. So sometimes these remnants take place. There was another one that we had on Double H where there was a small little section in the middle of Double H that was just sitting there, owned by someone who they never knew they owned until they got a tax bill for $100.
The county's had some of that stuff too, where we've conveyed it
Interesting.
back to different owners, because there was a sliver that the county had owned, and we needed to do some maintenance on there, but we couldn't get on the property without a helicopter or permission.
I appreciate the explanation, I really do, because it just seems strange, but now I get it. Thank you
Yeah,
very
these little
much.
slivers will come up every once in a while.
Every now and then.
Yep.
Thank you.
Commissioners, what are your wishes?
I think we have a motion. and a
Do we?
second. Yep, I believe so.
Oh, got all confused now. The motion and a second to accept the conveyance. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that is approved. Item number 7 is a request from the city of Stevens Point to accept a donation of land from Valley Communities Credit Union along Henrietta Street with parcels identified, page 66 of your packet. Director?
So there's two parcels of land that are owned by Valley Communities Credit Union, which is located here on Church Street. The two parcels that they own, totaling about 30,000 square feet in area, just off of Henrietta, they're looking to deed over to the city along with $1,500 to assist with closing costs, and while some may ask why, there are some challenges with these lots, in that they don't have any utilities in front of them. So that's one of the challenges with them. So we've been working with Valley Community Credit Union on these lots in kind of what the best course of action. In terms of this request, I really see this maybe 3 different things that might be able to take place. I'm going to go right here. We might be able to look at doing some sort of park system, small mini park within these parcels. This map, which is also included in your packet, kind of indicates in the red here kind of the areas that are in need of a park, and the yellow a little bit lesser need, but very close to that within a 10-minute walk of a park. These areas here don't have a ton of parkland, so it could be some sort of mini park, recognizing though we're going to have maintenance costs associated with that, not knowing what we would do with that on day one, but we might be able to throw some small benches or do something with there. The second one, because there are no utilities in front of them on Henrietta, it's going to be likely very difficult for a developer to come in and develop the lots. You probably could get 3 single-family homes, maybe a few twin homes in there. But there's probably going to need to be some assistance that is needed in order to make that a realistic avenue to take place. If you can acquire this lot too, maybe then you get a little bit more. This is privately owned, but then maybe a different development maybe makes sense. And then the third option might be just to hold or to transfer to the adjacent property owners. I don't know if I think the bank has reached out to them, but they're now I don't believe there's any interest. But owners do change over, and someone may want to take advantage of that opportunity at a later date. So. I think, from a city perspective, just recognize there are going to be costs associated with taking on this property. Going to be minimal, but we're going to have to cut the grass in the summer. I think it's going to be very challenging for this to develop on its own. There may need to be some sort of cooperative agreement with a developer in order to extend utilities through this area to get some additional maybe residential homes in there. We did a very similar thing on 4th Avenue with the Grant School Project development. However, that one was a little bit larger, where you could get a little bit more dense, and you didn't have as much cost in terms of extending those utilities. So those are the three kind of avenues I see this could take place, but I don't see it developing on its own unless it's just transferred to an adjacent neighbor and they just take over that land.
And that's because the cost of running the utilities is really, really high. Some of the other things that I've been talking about recently, just trying to explore uses, potential community garden sites. It's a little challenging because there's no water. However, you might be able to work something out with one of the adjacent properties for irrigation if needed. Pollinator gardens are the other thing that came up. Been approached by two different groups in regards to helping establish some pollinator gardens within the city. So we're not exactly sure what we would do with it at this point, and that would be a decision for the city at a later date. We're just looking for a recommendation as to whether or not this body would like the city to proceed with acquiring that property. Valley Communities can't use it. They talked about using it for snow storage. Of course, they can't push it across the street, so they would have to get equipment to move it across the street, which would be allowed, but they're not going to get equipment to do that. It really does nothing for them, and they asked if we would be interested, offered $1,500 as some additional support for closing costs and maintenance, because they understand that there'll be some maintenance costs there for a while too. So that's what we're looking at. Comments from the audience? Alder Dugan. We'll go with Alder Morrow. He was standing. And Alder Dugan, go next.
Sean Morrow, 2509 Falcons Cove. You were saying that there's no city hookup that's even close, or like a few of the surrounding homes that are part of Hull?
No. Nothing is part of Hull. That was the last agenda item?
Right, but
there's nothing in
but
the...
I thought there'd be something that would be able to hook.
So the nearest utilities are either the properties that you see to the west, or what is that, Henrietta?
So there are utilities in Whiting and I believe
Whiting.
Williams, so they'd have to extend them down
The two cross
Henrietta.
streets.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you'd have to run them all the way down at about $100 a foot.
Right, so they're just at a very bad spot.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Alder Dugan?
I thought I was only going to talk about one thing, but the problem is, having lived in this town a long time, I used to live in this area when my children were very young, and when I first met Mary McComb in the early 70s. We go back, some of us. You don't have to be young to be on the council. So anyway, at that time, it was used as a large garden, kind of a community garden that people shared. And the older woman who owned it was allowing people to come there and use it as a garden. I don't know if I think they were paying her a small fee. I don't know how they got water, because my husband-to-be was one of the people who was doing that. Also, because I lived nearby, only about a block away, there was no place for children to have green space. So when my kids would want green space, one of them was in school with the young daughter of the director of the Portage County Home. And there's a lot of green space there. So that's where we went for park activity. But I think this would be a really nice green space for gardening, for beekeeping, but definitely for some green space for the children and others. Just a small, pocket park.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Alder Johnson, President Johnson? I don't think you have to duck. I said, I don't think you have to duck.
It's a short duck, I realize.
Okay.
I could probably stand straight up and not have to duck. I realize that. Melissa Johnson, District 5. Given that I've been a longtime advocate to create one other city park, and I ride this street quite frequently when it's nice out. I don't ride in the winter. I know. But it's a lovely street. It's very quiet. And what I've noticed over the last 5 or 6 years that I've been riding bike is that there is a growing number of families in that community, in that neighborhood. So, yes, would some money have to go into it? Well, we started the Friends of Emerson Park, and we're doing the fundraising, so maybe there needs to be a Friends of Henrietta Park. But it seems to have value for that, and anyway, I think it would be a cool little park. Thanks.
Thank you. Alder McComb. We'll have the whole council speak on it.
Mary McComb, still in beautiful District 9. This is not in my district, but just half a block away, and I think a park would be a great idea, or any sort of open space pollinator garden, and then maybe the city could just do trails in there to reach the plants, like at the dog park. Anyhow, I think it's worth accepting. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay. Commissioners, Commissioner Arnson.
Might there be any potential liabilities there? From my
more-
background, environmental contamination, do we know the history of its use? Was there used to be buildings there that got raised and buried? Do we know the history of it?
Okay, yeah, the records are kept at the city. There's nothing that I'm aware of that would raise an eyebrow. Director,
Good.
anything to add there? I
No.
don't think so.
Not looking for trouble, just asking.
Okay, no, that's very good. Commissioner Cooper?
Yeah, has Director Schrader been discussed this at all? And
We've talked about it amongst staff, but because we don't have an use for it specifically, as the director laid out, we've got a couple of options.
He said he would take it if you gave it to him.
After May 1st.
After May. Yeah. But again, it may be kind of, in the meantime, it sits as a park, but maybe there's something that happens 2 or 3 years later where maybe then it becomes developed. Maybe lots become such a premium that people are willing to run utilities.
Maybe someone wants to move a rectory there.
Maybe.
Just saying.
So,
Without bathrooms.
All right. Any other comments? Alder Nebone.
Yeah, I like the opportunity to have an option, whatever it might become, just to be able to acquire a pretty nice sized little chunk of property in a good area. What the heck,
Okay. Is there a motion in there?
Sure. I would move to approve the donation of land from Valley Communities Credit Union on Henrietta Street.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Haynes. Further discussion? Teddy, anything to add? He saw. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And that is approved. On page 70, Commissioners, you will find strategic plans, request for proposals. Director.
So this is kind of the next step in the planning process. You should be receiving a draft of the comprehensive plan here shortly. SEH did get us a final draft that we're reviewing internally by staff. Within there, you're going to have larger goals, objectives, and policies, but then typically going down to a more micro level in terms of, next 3 to 5 year sessions, you'd have the strategic plan carrying out those goals, objectives, and policies with a little bit greater detail. This is something that the city had budgeted for, I believe, last year, and we've rolled it over for this year, waiting for that comprehensive plan process to conclude so we know what we have in there for goals, objectives, and policies. But this, again, would be more of the macro or micro level type planning, more narrowly focused on things that we need to get done strategically, not only from a land use standpoint, but more of an operational standpoint as well with the city. While it's not required to have the Plan Commission provide a recommendation on this, I think it was appropriate, given you are the planning arm of the city, and it's not necessarily just land use planning. There are other forms of planning, of which this is one of. One minor change in here, the due date we would put at May 17th, so just making sure that that's consistent throughout the document, not April 26th, but May 17th, so I had to change it in 2 places. But this is in front of you for review and comments and suggestions. Following that, we will look to release it later this month and then have them back in May and then award probably in July.
Comments from the audience? President Johnson. Coincidentally, I know other people had thought about it, but I'm crediting you with the request to have a strategic plan.
Thank you. Melissa Johnson, still Alder 5, Alder from the 5th District. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I've been asking for this since I got on council. Of course, we were successful in getting the money in the capital budget a couple of years ago for this process. I am, believe it or not, a lot of people don't think strategic planning is fun. I do. But there's one thing that I was wondering if we could add into the bullets on either page 73 of 76 of our packet, or 74 of 76. And you mentioned, Director Ostrowski, you mentioned the comprehensive plan, which in my opinion, it is absolutely essential to align our comprehensive plan and our strategic plan. Articulating that in a bullet point, I think, is going to be really important.
Okay.
So that whomever is awarded this contract is well aware that we are aligning these documents for the future of Stevens Point, not only in the long term, but also the short term. And I would also add in at that point to make sure it's aligned or consistent with comp plan, and also the plans we have in place. Our Green Tier Legacy Community, which Alder McComb and Alder Shore have worked so hard on, the Bike and Pedestrian Plan, and our Outdoor Recreation Plan. Aligning all of those things, otherwise we'll have things kind of all over the place. The strategic plan needs to bring those all together. So those are my comments, and thank you,
Great.
thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think we implied that, we just didn't explicitly say it. That's a very good idea, though, so people understand. We may know what we're talking about sometimes, but others may not. Okay, anyone else? Okay, commissioners? Thoughts, comments? Alder, or Commissioner Haynes?
So is this like a whole city strategic plan?
Yes.
All the departments?
Yep.
Water, sewer?
Everything.
Everything?
Yep.
Okay. So it's not just focused on planning and zoning?
No.
And land use and,
Correct.
okay.
Nope.
All right,
Yep, all encompassing.
okay. So I do think that I agree with the recommendation that was
Good.
made by the alder.
Yep, and I saw the director making notes already.
Yeah. I just wonder if it needs to say something that it really does encompass all the departments in the city and moving
Okay.
them forward
We
somehow.
can certainly add that. Any other comments? Alder Kneebone?
I remember long ago in a galaxy far, far away when I was in grad school to get a master's degree in planning. I had a class with an environmental activist who said, all you planners, you just come up with these documents and then you throw them on a shelf and never look at them. So I would just encourage all of us in the planning process to make sure that what we bring forward has an ability to actually do something about, and not just sit on a shelf. Make it a document that we hold in our hand and march forward with for the future, so.
Good point. Okay, Commissioner Arnson?
I guess a little bit more clarification is the strategic, just the hierarchy, is the strategic plan essentially a subset of the comp plan? Is it a focusing of the near future of
I would
the
say it's a
comp
little
plan?
bit different in the fact that the strategic plan should be kind of like an overall vision, like an overall
That's what the comprehensive
goal.
plan had.
The comprehensive plan gets into a lot more detail.
Well,
Director?
So, no, your comprehensive, I mean, I think you're on the right path, Commissioner Arnson. It kind of is a subset of the comp plan, but this will get a little bit more in the this will get more in the weeds in terms of how we get a lot of those things done that we've outlined within the comprehensive plan, mainly at a departmental level. You know, are we set up, you know, just for example, maybe organizationally, are we set up correctly on a structure-wide in terms of departments? This will kind of get into those weeds where the comp plan really doesn't. It's more, it's not 30,000 feet, but it's a little bit higher up where these will kind of get after the short-term recommendations outlined within the comp plan and how we actually carry those out through specific action plans.
I guess my understanding is that the comp plan is the overarching goals, but then it gets focused using zoning and ordinances and things like that. Would the strategic plan kind of be an intermediary of that? This is what your comp plan says, strategic plan narrows it down, and then the next step would be specific.
Yeah, so it'll also be kind of, for example, within the comp plan, you're going to have certain goals, a limited number of goals, and then you'll have a wide variety of objectives and then policies. The strategic plan will kind of carry out those objectives that are needed in the short term to start achieving those larger goals. So there might be, just throw a number, there might be, let's say, 50 objectives. The strategic plan is going to carry out, let's say, 10 of them. We're going to go focus on these 10 over the next 3 to 5 years.
Prioritize them?
Correct.
Thanks.
I guess just another way, I mean, just to help maybe clarify you as well, and tell me if I'm wrong, just that, comp plan is we want more green space, and if it's more parks, the strategic plan would say, well, you maybe need to hire another, parks person to be able to, or to funnel some money for another lawnmower because you have more green space. And then in the comp plan, we kind of discussed we want to expand green space.
And you can do strategic planning through your comp plan, but it can really drag out that process and get really detailed, where I think this provides a good breakup of the time between the two documents and kind of the check back. So, but yeah, you're right kind of on more of those specific level requirements.
I think earlier too, I had the two reversed. But.
Yeah, the one thing I would say, because I view the comprehensive plan as really focusing a lot on the built and natural environment, whereas I would hope the strategic plan wouldn't be just like this is here and then we're moving down like a funnel or something. I think it's a totally different thing, focusing on should take it into account. But it could also focus on the health department and the police and the jail and, all the different things that may not be talked about in the comprehensive plan. So
And
I
that's
think
still
it's
need to
really
get done.
important in that sense, but I certainly don't want it just to take, here's all this stuff in the comp plan and let's see how we get it done.
But within the comp plan, you're right on that, in that it takes more into account. I think Wisconsin does it too a little bit differently by identifying the certain elements that need to be included within the comp plan through the smart growth law. But your comp plan could be that inclusive. Ours is probably not to that level of that, but really getting after those objectives. And it will talk about other departments, whether it's the health department. But I think, health department does have an impact also on land use components and policing and making sure that proper planning is done to maybe not have to have as many police officers because certain things are taken into consideration. For example, having your parks that can be very viewable and there are not a lot of obstructions, so that one officer can drive by and see the entire park and see what's going on. I mean, things like that can be in there, but yes, the strategic plan is more of that micro level approach where we're going to start carrying out those initiatives within the comp plan, but they will likely include other things as well. Structure of the city, proper departments. So.
Okay. President Johnson, you had comments?
Yeah. So I love this discussion, and thank you once again. Great discussion, and I'm just going to illustrate how I use comprehensive plan, strategic plan, and then my work plan every day. So my employer has we recently completed our upgrade of the comprehensive plan, and there's a number of goals within that comprehensive plan. County board pulled out several of those goals and said, these are our priorities, they're going into our strategic plan. Within the strategic plan, then there are sort of goals within that and how we achieve that, and I'll illustrate that by, one is to reduce something. My employer has a goal of being the healthiest, safest, most prosperous county in the state, and one of those is we can't be prosperous and healthy if we have a lot of drug addiction and mental health issues, post-traumatic stress for children. So the action item is reduce the amount of children into child protective services, and then we talk about how we do that. So there's goals within that, and that creates a work plan for the departments who are involved in that. And the work plan is an annual thing. So my work plan related to natural resources protection is aligned with healthiest and safest. So those things just funnel down. And so I think you can think of it that way, that comp plan is just really big. Strategic plan is a little bit smaller, and then staff gets to execute those work plans that are aligned with the strategic plan to achieve the goals of the strategic plan that are aligned with the comprehensive plan. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Alder McComb?
Mary McComb, District 9. When I've worked with strategic plan, the part that, and it's included, the part that seems so vital to me is that it is, in one sense, it's like really overarching because it absolutely needs to start with identifying your mission and your vision for the organization as a whole. And as I think of it, it's not just the city organization, but the city as a whole. Maybe I'm being too broad, but in my mind, it should be a chance, and we do this with our other planning too. We bring in public participation, but I look on it as an opportunity getting started, especially for the public to come in and talk about their vision for the city, including, you know, health and.
Haven't we done that already, Mary, with the comprehensive plan?
Commissioner,
Sorry.
we can't get into a engaging discussion. Here we have to, one side and the other.
I mean, I was involved with the comprehensive plan, but I don't remember, I don't think we had Stevens Point as a whole, and Michael, maybe I'm wrong. So anyhow.
The intention is though to definitely get public participation.
Oh, absolutely.
As with all of our processes, but they'll hold specific public meetings as
Yeah,
outlined in
I
the
know.
request.
Thanks.
Commissioner Haynes, anything to add?
No.
Okay. Any other comments? Anything from the commissioners? Okay, still going to be taking a little input, so if someone watching or listening has a comment, by all means contact the director's office in community development, and we can try and get those added and get this RFP out. Anything you wanted to add there? Okay. And then, next item on the agenda is the Community Development Department's monthly report for January and February of 2019. Director.
So those were handed out to you today, January 2019, in February. Still starting off the year pretty strong. Here's February. I'll jump to that just because that's the latest one. But 124 permits already. Similar to 2017, 2018, we had a little bit more activity. However, we've got a lot of projects in queue for 2019. I think some of them will start taking place next month, where we'll start seeing a significant uptick, especially in the year-to-date valuation moving forward. We're continuing to go through several things from a code enforcement standpoint and a violation report, in terms of also looking at a new property maintenance code, which should be also coming out within the next probably month or two, with the hopes of having that ready for implementation for the summer months of 2019. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for the director? As you mentioned, we are teed up to have a pretty decent 2019 if things fall into place. So, good. Director, update.
Couple things. So, as I mentioned earlier, just received the draft or complete draft of the comp plan. So staff will be reviewing that, providing any initial comments back to SEH, and then get you that draft once those comments have been taken into consideration back to you, just making sure everything is correct with numbers and so forth. So that'll be back in front of the Plan Commission shortly. Currently formatting the Land Development Code. All we have left is Chapter 7 to get through on that, so that'll be coming to you again as well. Targeted Area Master Plans, we had the initial kickoff meeting. We're going to be having another meeting here in April for the Division Street corridor, and then also May for the downtown area, so we'll be getting some additional information relating to that. Another program that we're looking at doing is starting kind of a neighborhood delineation, neighborhood certification program to get more buy-in and excitement throughout certain neighborhoods. And typically when you have a neighborhood association, you're more more involved and take care of your properties, and I think you just have a real feel in terms of property in general. But what we're looking at doing is creating maybe two separate types of designation. One is a neighborhood just group, which would allow anybody to form. So if we don't want to discourage people from doing neighborhood associations. Sometimes it's a very monumentous task to try to create a huge neighborhood association. It's very difficult. We don't have many within the community, but we don't want to discourage that. We want to promote the grassroots types of organizations. So if you want to start a neighborhood group, more than willing to do so, that's great. But the other component that we'd want to do is maybe like a qualified or a certified neighborhood association that there may be additional things that are involved, whether they get signage for their district, whether they get through the redevelopment authority, if we do certain programs for rehab programs, maybe they get certain grant programs associated with that and so forth. So we're kicking around those ideas right now. UWSP did a kind of delineation study, or housing study did a delineation study. It's something we identified in our comp plan. CREATE has done a delineation study. So it's something we'll be moving forward with that within the next few months as well. And then finally, public input meeting. Many of you probably noticed there was a press release, joint press release between the city and county on future space needs government property exchange, looking for public input on that. There's several ideas floating around with that, and just trying to get some additional comments relating from that from a public standpoint, but hopefully something that can take care of the needs for both entities for the foreseeable future. I know there will be much more conversation on that, but March 28th is when we're looking to have that public input meeting, 7 p.m. at the County Annex Building.
Okay. Any questions for the director? Okay. Alder Dugan?
Alder Dugan, District 8. Just wanted to make a quick comment that I've spoken with the director and with Kyle, Assistant Director, and I wanted District 8 people to know, those who were so involved in beginning to get an interest in neighborhood association last year, that we will start up again. And some of those people have already delineated their areas, but they need to know what the next steps are. And the neighborhood assistance here will come forth very soon, when the weather's better.
Thank you. All right. Seeing no one else wishing to speak, our agenda is exhausted, and we are adjourned at 7:07.
Weather better. Anytime soon.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.